Hello, Rick.
Hello, Keith.
Right, we're going to continue where we left off from the last 3 chapters.
That's a lot. Can we make this a quick one?
Right, anyway, okay. So, you bailed out. We've had this full story of the Jaguar ejection.
The second ejection was from a hunter on the 10th of April 1990. And I was flying with FRADU at Yeovilton as a civilian, contracted pilot, Fleet Requirement Air Defence Unit, if you didn't know what FRADU was. And we were 6 or 7 people who were all ex-fighter pilots. Navy.
Can I stop your flow there?
Yeah.
That was a company formed to do targeting work with the military, basically, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were training all the NATO ships in the Channel and in places like Gibraltar, which we detached to, training their guns, their radar systems for picking up targets coming in, and we were the targets ourselves. We had a light on the front so they could pick us up, and the gunners could see us coming in from 8 or 9 miles away. We were simulating Russian missiles, the Kelt, the Kresta, the Kara, and all the other Russian missiles, which would be launched from Russian Bears. So we could start sometimes at 100 miles and then simulate that Russian missile coming right down to 50 feet. And we were some of the only aeroplanes that were cleared down to 50 feet, which was pretty low, as you can imagine. And I was doing our Thursday war, which is something which all the pilots love to do. On Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, we would start a whole day of attacking ships which had been in Portland Harbour on the south coast. They would slip out of this sheltered harbour along the island of Portland, Bill, out into the Channel. And our first attack was scheduled to meet them when they were in that tight channel along the side of Portland Bill. And then throughout the day, the attacks would build up to an 8-ship attack in the Channel where more ships were sailing, and even a Canberra would go out there and tow a target for them, and they would fire missiles at it. So Thursday was our Thursday war, and the happiest sortie was the 2 pilots that went out on that first attack, which was basically very low level, coming in, hiding along the cliffs, running in coordinated pair and attacking a ship while all the men in their white gear was trying to shoot us down. Well, we'd taken off, Dave Linney and I was in a 2-seater sitting in the left hand seat by myself. He was in a single-seater sitting on my wing. Before that morning, when we walked out at 8 o'clock to take off at 8:15, I had already been airborne, and I'd got up at 5 o'clock that morning to fly in a hot air balloon. I'd decided in the late 1980s, early 90s, that I was going to leave FRADU because of the perestroika that was happening in Russia, and as I was the last man there, I was going to be the first man out. I'd been given that. So I didn't want to go to airliners, so I started hot air ballooning. And that spring, I'd already been doing retrieving for hot air balloons, and deciding that I wanted to become a commercial pilot, which had just been approved by the CAA to have hot air ballooning after 200 years. We were one of the last countries in the world.
Did they just drag their feet out doing that? Or?
They did, and you could go and get a balloon ride for 50 quid or 30 quid by going into a bar and in a pub and booking. But other countries had gone commercial. Guys were doing commercial exams and tests and so on, and the British decided to do that in the late 80s, early 90s, and I thought that would be good, and I could get into a system which was basically unlike the airlines at the age of 45, where I'd be a small fish in a big pond. If I could get my commercial license and go back to Australia, where I'd already worked, then I could become a big fish in a small pond, if you wish.
All right.
So that's what I did, and I'd already got a job. FRADU was very good because you didn't have to go into work every day. If you weren't flying, you didn't go to work, which is magic. It's not the same as the military. There were no parades. There was no yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. We just came in to fly our hunters and then went home. So very, very few secondary duties, unless you were a flight commander or something like that, QFI. Anyway, that morning I'd got up at 5. I'd gone out to fly my first flight with an instructor. His name was Guy Sudlow, and he's still a good friend of mine many years later. And we'd gone up in a little C-77 balloon, which I'd bought to do my training. And we took off from Lidford on Foss on a farm called Wheat Hill. There was a wind blowing to the west towards Bruton, and I'd already done quite a lot of retrieving for balloons and had a couple of jollies with with balloons, but this was my first instructional ride towards my commercial.
But you'd have done the balloon in Australia before, hadn't you? Or this?
No, this was my very first look at hot air balloons. Anyway, Guy Sudlow, big tall guy, had given me some instruction beforehand, just indications, but this was my flight completely. So I had to take off, launch the balloon for about an hour, and we drifted towards Bruton with me being given various instructions from Guy up and down, and we landed in a field short of Bruton, covered in fresh cow pats, and we drifted through this thing at about 5 knots with all the mud coming into the basket. A bit of a heavy landing. We loaded our basket onto a trailer, took it through the farmyard, gave the farmer his bottle of wine, and we had breakfast on the way back to the farm at Lidford on Foss, cold bacon butties, which was great. I had a debrief which said I had to improve dramatically my landings, and off I went to work. And I got into work at about 7:30, which was a good 15 minutes away from Lidford on Foss. Changed out of my muddy boots and my cow flop covered jeans and jacket, and put on my dark green flight suit and polar neck sweater. We had no rank on our flying equipment, and I walked out with Dave Linian strapped into the left-hand seat of a T8. We took off on time at 8:15 and turned right towards the coast. A 7-8 minute flight at 400 knots, and we pushed over the cliffs and down to 50 feet and disappeared along the cliffs towards Portsmouth, while we could see on our right the big warship coming out of Portland Harbour and getting ready to be attacked. Over the next 30 minutes we did what the hunters did, which was coordinated attack. So we'd split up, head out into the channel not too far away from Portland Bill, and then sneak in at 50 foot around the edge of Portland or along the coast, and then pull up to 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and in a coordinated attack, making sure we didn't attack one another or hit one another, we'd do ground attack on these ships. You could see the men on board with their white gear on, moving the guns, and it was real hooligan stuff. Fantastic flying, really enjoyable, dodging down in the dive and then going back down to sea level and disappearing out along the coast and disappearing again. And we did that for about 30 minutes while the ship was steaming out, getting quicker and quicker into the channel. And then we decided to come back home. There were no more ships to attack. He'd gone out into the channel. And I decided as a leader, Dave came into close. We climbed through about 10,000 foot of cloud. It was not particularly thermic. It was thin stratusy type layers. And we came out on top at 16,000 feet, heading north towards Yeovilton. The plan then was just to go home, but we had something like about 10 or 15 minutes to fly with fuel, so I decided to do a little bit of combat manoeuvring. And the sequence for this was that we would turn outwards 45 degrees from close formation, Dave on my right, and we were heading north to Yeovilton, which was only 10 minutes away, but he turned out through 45 degrees. I did the same. We timed 1 minute precisely, then turned 90 degrees back in towards one another. And your geometry will tell you that if we maintain those headings, we would actually cross over and we'd get visual. The plan was to one aeroplane would go lower, which was me, the two-seater, and I'm sitting on the right, as I mentioned earlier. So What I wanted to do, if you're turning the two-seater without anybody in the right-hand seat to help you, you need to turn left towards the threat. So my 90-degree turn was a little bit more. I wanted to see Dave on my left. The sun was on my right. I was heading to the east. So he had the vantage of height by 1,000 feet, but that didn't worry me particularly. And I had the sun in my eyes, so he was coming out of the sun. And I'm looking up left in my 10 o'clock, and round about 5 or 6 miles as we closed, I picked up Dave. I called Tally. I was able to attack him, but he couldn't attack me until he saw me. But he eventually saw me quite quickly after that. And as he crossed past me on the left, about 1,000 feet above, I pulled very, very hard to the left. I put full bank on and pulled probably round about 5.5 to 6 G. But I'm looking over my left shoulder now at Dave, who's kept level. I knew how Dave would fight. I'd fought him a few times combat. He's an ex-Harrier pilot, and the Harrier, brilliant aeroplane to fight, but he always kept his speed on. He didn't commit himself too early, and there's nothing wrong with that. I did, because I was in an aeroplane with a little less advantage. I couldn't see out the right-hand side, so I was going to be the aggressor. He passed over the top of me, pulling slightly to the left, and I went high behind him, reducing speed dramatically to about 20,000 feet, still pulling quite hard. And as I tipped in over the top, I'd obviously cut the corner. He was about 3 or 4 miles away, increasing his bank, and we're both in a left-hand turn. As I got to about 190, 200 knots in the wing over with full power on, and my stick was in the left-hand corner, it wouldn't move. It went solid, and I couldn't move it, and I couldn't work out what was stopping it. There were no hydraulic warnings. There was a slight fore and aft movement, so I did have elevator control, but I couldn't pull any more because I was down to.
Was your instinct to really panic, or did you think
at that stage of the game? I think the word panic is an understatement.
Yeah, no, I just wondered, because I know your brains think it's like, what's going on here?
Well, it was complete confusion as having a control I couldn't move.
Because you had no indication of what was going on, so that was even
absolutely,
more.
There was no hydraulic. There was no hydraulic warnings. There was nothing jamming it. I then took my hand off the throttle. I still had full power because the speed was coming back very quickly now. I'm still going vertical. And the bank is increasing because there's full left aileron, which I'd put in on the start of the brake. And I basically couldn't pull back to just check if I had elevator, because that would have probably stalled it even more and I would have gone into a spin. But it was the rolling motion which was really confusing. I put my hand on the control column, my left hand off the throttle onto the control column, and tried to move it by sheer force away from the top left hand corner. There was a small amount of movement, probably about 1/4 of an inch, but no more. Just no more, and it was literally all the strength I had. By now the nose had dropped because I was going through about 180 knots, and the spiral continued to speed up. So as I went down vertically with the aeroplane still in a full left-hand spin, it was speeding up. I closed the throttle immediately because the speed was building up very quickly, and I pressed the button literally seconds after I realised I couldn't move the control column, and said, "Dave, there's something wrong with the controls. I think I'm going to have to get out." Right. In those words. That was recorded by Yodelton, had this on tape, but I haven't got the tape with me. I lost it. Anyway, so he didn't say anything, but he immediately turned round and could see my aeroplane spiralling down. He did see the aeroplane pitch up a couple of times, and I remember trying to pulling the stick back as I started that roll down into the vertical, and all it did was stall the aeroplane slightly, and he did see that. I wasn't aware that it had pitched up, that he would see it, but anyway, I was more concerned about the speed build-up, and the aeroplane was going down vertical. It went through 250, 350, 400 knots extremely quickly, and I'm still fighting with the aileron to try and put it in the middle, but nothing would stop it from going down and spinning. Not spinning, spiraling very, very quickly. I'd already said I was going to get out, and I decided that I was going to use both hands on the bottom handle. I never had that opportunity on the first one because my other hand was out. But you can either hold your wrist. I'm left-handed, obviously, and I put my right hand over my left wrist and my left hand on the handle.
Were you really automatic pilot, or did you think, oh no, here we go again, or did you just you didn't think that?
I did think that, to be honest. I thought, oh Jesus, it worked the first time. I hope it works this time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to get rid of the canopy on the other. It was all a bit of a scramble. On this, I had time to think, and it's not a nice time to think. And my big worry was the big canopy on the T8.
Yeah.
It's quite a big steel thing, and if it doesn't come off, you can't eject because there's steel above your head. And what you have to do is get rid of the canopy. And knowing that one day I might have to jump out of a T8, if the canopy doesn't come off, you have to reach down into the middle of the cockpit and pull another handle to get rid of the canopy.
Right.
There's an interrupter link in it which stops the ejection seat from working. And fortunately, when I pull the handle, you sort of wait the 2 seconds. It takes half a second for it to happen. It feels like an age.
Yeah.
And I could see the clouds coming up at about 12,000 feet beneath me. And the speed, when I last looked, was about 450 knots, still going up. The throttle was closed at this stage, but anyway, I pulled the handle, I waited, and then bang, the canopy came off. A lot of dust and muck came out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was just cockpit debris, from under the ejection seat, or where. And I remember feeling, all the dust come up underneath my mask and my visor, and then it seemed an age before it fired. But then it went, and out I go. And
what was the time scale between?
It's about a second.
No, from the fault.
Oh, from the fault to that.
Roughly,
Okay, sorry, Dave. It's probably about 5-6 seconds.
That's amazing. So all that you spoke about for, literally 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, it seems a long time, but it's not very much. So up 1001, 1002. 2003, 2004, 2000, maybe a little bit more, maybe 8 to 10 seconds before I pull the handle.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Just going through the motions, and then the lovely sound of the bang, and your head's forced to witness the aeroplane disappearing, and I saw the Hunter still turning quickly to the left, spiraling into cloud, and it just disappeared, and then the pull of the parachute pulls your head away, so the parachute opens and your head goes.
So did you have any concept if you're over water or land at that point?
No, I knew I'd be over land.
Right, okay.
Because we climbed out over the sea, and we'd been going towards Yelverton.
So in your head you thought, right.
In my head I knew where I was. I was basically north of Portland Bill, somewhere near Dorchester, over cloud, heading towards Yelverton. So I had a rough idea of where I might come out of cloud, but and then into cloud, and it's quite unusual. I'd been in cloud in aeroplanes, but a parachute never. And it's like being in a shower, but a cold shower, and it's very damp and very quiet. I think that's the thing that
after all that chaos,
after ejection, you get this. I got it the same in the Jag, but it's total silence, and you're sort of shocked and thinking, God, at least I'm alive, and the parachutes. So that's the first thought, is that difference in panic from a cockpit and noise and all the movement, and all of a sudden you're drifting down gently in a parachute, and it's quite a difference. And then the next thing I heard, almost seconds within going into cloud, was a boom, and I heard, and you think you feel it, but a big boom, and that was the aeroplane hitting the ground, which made me wonder how close I was to the ground at that stage. I went through cloud for probably about 25-30 seconds. I drifted through cloud, and then I came out very suddenly in the green fields, and there was a field which looked very close to me indeed, and a big bush on my left. It was below 1,000 feet, and I was dropping and drifting backwards. The wind was coming, a very lightish wind, probably about 10 knots from the east. So I was going backwards in my parachute, thinking about things that I should do, but I was so close to the ground. I didn't have time to drop dinghies and things. I just got my feet together and thought about turning round and trying to land sideways like you're taught to do in parachute training. But I was going backwards along the side of this big hedge on my left. Just before I hit the ground, I could see the smoke of where the hunter had gone in, and amazing, even with my helmet on, I could hear that bee-bar, bee-bar.
No, that's amazing.
Of already in the
They'd
time.
scrambled them, yeah.
Yeah, which is really quite strange.
And obviously a relief that the plane had come down in open land, I suppose, really.
Yeah, it was a sloping field. The farmer said he had 30 sheep in it, and then half of them had been killed, but I think it was a bit of a fib.
Insurance job, yeah.
Yeah, I found out later that they said there were 30 feet in the hole that the airplane went in. 30 sheep in the hole, but I don't think it was. Anyway, or they jumped in and committed suicide or something. But he certainly claimed the money, I think. Anyway, so I drifted backwards, bit my tongue, which was a bit unfortunate. And
That's slightly better than last time, anyway.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. And I didn't think about that. I stood up. I had an immersion suit on and took my helmet off. The hedge, as I said, was probably about 2 or 3 feet away to my left, maybe a bit more, 10 feet away. And I'm thinking, oh, well, here we go. And I got my radio out and went on to 243 and basically started the hue and cry, got the emergency frequency going so they could pick me up, expecting a helicopter. And I was in the process of just seeing how bad my tongue was and bitten it. It wasn't. I hadn't bitten the end off, but it was bleeding quite profusely. And I just stood there thinking, well, I'm sure somebody will pick me up in a minute. And
so that was any injury then? That was any injury?
Yeah.
What about your back and spine and stuff?
Oh no, I'd hit the ground hard, but I'd sort of prepared for it. I got my ankles, but I was dragged, and it was a shock. I never did a good landing on either of my ejections, particularly. There's so much going on, you really don't have time. And this particular one, I came out of cloud very low on this field, which was because it was on a hill, sloping hill.
Yeah.
The next thing, which is sort of a bit of fun and games, was that I was standing there waiting for the helicopter, and about 300 yards away, where the field sloped up to the right, was a fence. And all of a sudden, alongside that fence, on the other side of the fence, a red car turned up, a little red car. It was a Honda type thing, smallish one. And somebody jumped out, and I stood there and watched this, and it was pretty apparent it was a young girl, and she got herself through the fence and ran towards me. I tell you what, the sound of music was it was just like it. And she ran towards me. She had a red dress on, I think. I think everything was red. Maybe it was the blood on my lips. I don't know. But anyway, she ran towards me. It was like Heathcliff, it's like one of those things where, hello. And she stood in front of me, and I think she was 16 or 17 years old. And she said, oh, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm fine.
So it wasn't like the Battle of Britain, she offers you a cigarette?
Oh, yeah, here's a guy, a middle-aged guy, in his 50s or 40s, with a bitten lip, bleeding blood, and looking a bit, obviously, dishevelled. And there's this young girl. I said, yeah, I'm great. And she said, I've just seen something from my kitchen window. And I'm going, what? She said, I saw something dropping outside the window. And it's landed in my father's field. I'm wondering if you want it. And and I'm going, thinking it went in a hole over there. And then I suddenly realised it would have been the canopy.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I said, oh yeah. She said, it's a big silvery thing, and it's landed 100 yards in front of our farm. Was that effect? And I suddenly twigged that what it would be, and I said, yes, it would be. We would want it. Thank you very much. And she started to talk to me and tell me where the farm was. And of course, I took my Chinograph pen out, and started writing her telephone number and address on my knee pad in Chinograph, as any good fighter pilot would, of course. And I'm doing this, and in the background I can hear this of a helicopter. And sure enough, this big Jolly Green helicopter came up behind the hedge like this. These two guys leaning out of the side door, and a guy's face flying it. A couple of guys looking over the top of the hedge, and they'd gone right to my beacon. He sort of hovered a few yards away from us and jumped out and ran to the both of us, me and this young lady, and he mouthed to me words which at the time I sort of knew what he was saying, and words to the effect that typical fighter pilot, you with the girls already, and taking their telephone number, which I was, but for the different reasons, right? So he thought that was funny. Anyway, so I jumped into the helicopter. They picked up all my gear. I turned off my radio, waved goodbye to this young lady as she walked back to her. It was a Toyota, that was right, a Toyota, a little red one, Toyota, because I found out later. Anyway, got in the helicopter and off we went. And it went to a Navy hospital. It took about 15-20 minutes. They dropped me in the entrance hall. The guy ran back to his helicopter and disappeared. I went in, sat down at the reception, waiting down there. So somebody said, sit down there. We're waiting for an emergency. And I sat down there for about 5 minutes, and I thought, hang on, that's me. And I stood up, and they said, "Oh, you Mr. Lee?" We didn't have any rank on or anything like that, but yeah, and they took me upstairs. I was there now, this was sort of 9 o'clock-ish. I was there until 5 o'clock, and it was so funny because there wasn't any doctors there that could inspect my spine. A few of the nurses came up, they put me on a bed, laid me out in case I had spinal problems. A couple of young interns or doctors pressed my spine and asked me questions and so on. I said, no, that's fine. And then they said that the surgeon that would release me would be there that afternoon. So I lay on the bed and read the paper, and round about midday, my boss and my chief pilot arrived with a big polythene bag, a big black dustbin bag, and sat alongside my bed and said, "Oh, here's your gear," which of course smelt of cow shit, and the boots were all covered in shit, and they kicked it under the bed. They'd taken it out of my locker, which was fun, and then they sort of said, "What happened?" And I told them, and Brian Grant, the chief pilot, said to me, "Did you try the other handle, the other stick?" And of course, in the two-seater, you can reach across and you can touch the other stick. And I remember looking, and it was in the same position, which is in the top left-hand corner. And he said, "Did you try it?" Now, Brian probably would have done, because he's got about 15,000 odds on hunters. But I looked at him as if to say, "You got to be joking."
Yeah.
So I didn't try that. Anyway, what happened then? Oh yes, so I waited, and eventually they left. The doctor arrived about 4:45. He checked me out, and he'd heard that I'd ejected before and had no major damage. They had an X-ray. They'd done an X-ray. They couldn't see anything on it, so they released me.
Wow!
And I didn't have any way to get back to Yeovilton. So they offered to give me a car, and driven by a female that was in this staff car, and it arrived outside the hospital. I'd put all my balloon gear on, much to the disgust of everybody around me, and then I jumped into this car and off we went to Yeovilton. And she said to me shortly after driving away, "Do you mind if I pick up my boyfriend?" Because it was now 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I went, "No, do your own thing,
Whatever, yeah.
Whatever."
So
she en route. So she picked up this young man. I think he was in the Navy. I'm not quite sure. And I jumped into the back seat, and he jumped into the front seat, and we drove to Yeovilton. And I asked them to drop me at the wardroom where I had my car. Oh no, at FRADU, where I had my car. I then drove to the wardroom. I just felt like a beer, and I got to the wardroom just before it was closing, I think, and had a quick beer by myself, and then drove to Butley, which was about 15 minutes drive away in the countryside, and I stopped again for another beer. I thought I deserved it at the local pub, and on the television in the local pub was this about a hunter that had ejected, and I'm sitting there, and there's 2 or 3 people watching it, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to say anything. So I remember going home and going to bed
it's all
by myself.
A strange day to end on, I suppose.
It was. So, and the Navy thought it was funny because I'd flown a balloon, flown a jet, flown an ejection seat, if you like, and then a parachute, and then a helicopter, so 5 types. And that was all before breakfast, which is quite unusual. If I'd have jumped into a piston aeroplane, I'd have got a world record, I'm sure.
That's true.
And a helicopter. Oh, well, I've gone in the helicopter.
Quick change in flying,
They did find... initially, a lot of people said, Rick, were you spinning? And it would have looked like I was spinning. I'd spun a Hunter before, 25 years earlier, but that was a single-seater, and I'd done it sort of semi-deliberately during combat, but that wasn't fun. Anyway, this wasn't spinning, but there's no way that they could sort of prove that. The hole that it went into was about 10 to 12 feet deep, and 2 days after I'd ejected, I was back at work. I had a day off. I came into work the day after the ejection, and flew a Hunter, and I flew too close to the actual ejection area because I was actually doing a flight down over the sea again, and I got bollocked for flying over it because I'd forgotten that it was a no-go area because the Navy were on the ground.
Right.
So the boss said, Rick, you should have done that. So I got bollocked again. And I thought, well, I'm sorry, mate, nobody could tell me. But anyway, so I'd flown it, and it was basically a restricted area, as they did. And it was silly of me, I never even thought about it, but I didn't go low or beat it up. I flew over at 1,500 feet just to have a look at the hole.
Yeah, you're bound to.
And a Navy guy, a guy there who was actually digging around trying to find bits of the aeroplane, which they couldn't because it was all in the hole. The hole was amazing, right? And I went out there about a week later, maybe less, and I drove my car out there to try and find this site where people were still looking for bits and pieces and whatever. And as you can see from that photograph that I've got in my logbook, they were picking bits up around the edge of the hole. They did a bit of digging, but the engine had gone in vertical and they weren't going to go all the way down. So there was very little left of the aeroplane to prove anything, because a lot of the guys said he was spinning. He got it into a spin by pulling it, and I said, no, I know the difference between a spin and a whatever. But there was always that doubt, and I began to wonder whether I really did have a control failure. And I actually said to the chief pilot when he came to my bedside in the hospital that day, I said, Brian, I broke it. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I broke it. I put so hard, I pulled 6.5 G, and I pulled like crazy. Me, so I really committed that turn. He said, don't be stupid, Rick, you can't break a hydraulic system. And I went, well, but in their minds there was rumours that I'd spun, you see. Anyway, so I go out in my car, I go to the local ordnance, and I eventually find the farm. And there's no little red Toyota in the driveway, but I knock on the farm door, which is close to where I thought that the hunter had gone in. The door opens, and there she is.
Yeah.
This young girl, and she says, it's you. And I'm going, middle-aged guy with a lip that's been healed but bitten of tongue. And she said, oh, I suppose you've come to see the wreckage. And I went, yes I have. I'd love to. Could you? And she said, quick, jump in my car. So we jump into the red Toyota. This is weird, this. And then we drive down this country lane, farm track on the farm. We go through 2 gates. I would never have found it. Besides, I didn't know how to get to it. And there's a guy in the field, one gentleman, some midshipman, but a senior guy, by himself with this hole which has been taped off with yellow tape. And he comes up and he puts a hand up, and there's a sign up that says no entry, accident. And then she leans out of the door and says to him, I'm with the pilot. And he bends down. He said, oh, hello, Mr. Lee. Yeah, you can come in. So he lets me in. I walk up to the hole and look down inside it. And he tells me that, it's a long way in there. So it's quite fascinating, really. And then I say to him, can I? He's been down there a few times. I said,
Yeah.
can I go down there? And he said, yeah, if you want to. So and she says, can I come? So I've got this picture in the local Dorchester Echo, which came out about with this young lady with me helping her down into this hole, right? And, because she wanted to go in there, and this gentleman is standing on the top, the midshipman.
Come and look at the hole I dug.
Yeah, and it was huge. It was quite big, It was quite big. Anyway, I get out of that, get in the car, stop messing around, and I go. And I go back to Yeovilton. A week or so later, it was proved that I wasn't spinning, and it was a complete hydraulic lock on the left aileron. When they searched a little bit further away from the hole where the hunter had gone in, and about 100 yards away in a sort of a cornfield, a stubbly cornfield, they found the hydraulic jack, which had been serviced incorrectly 8 years earlier, and somebody had put the stainless steel bolt that goes through the jack. It had been badly positioned inside one of the 3 grooves and hit, they found out, with not a hide-faced hammer but a steel hammer, and it had damaged the actual pawl, and it had jumped out when I'd gone to that violent hydraulic movement. It had actually jumped out of the pawl, which had been damaged, and gone to full lock, so there was no way it was ever going to get back in. It was a true mechanical failure.
Right.
And there's a photograph in my logbook, which we might put on the website, that you can actually see this, and it sort of vindicated the fact that this was a mechanical failure of the aileron hydraulic jack.
So did they then go and check all the hunters in service?
Well, it was the sort of thing that should be done, and that sort of happened when I'd had that hydraulic failure, and I nearly flew into the sea. I think I mentioned it in one of the websites, and that found an error, again a servicing error, where a nipple going into a hydraulic unit had been badly mechanically damaged before it went in with the wrong weapon, with the wrong tool. So but these things can sit in these aeroplanes for years. Obviously this one did with the hydraulic lock on the aileron. 8 years previously they'd traced the servicing of that jack.
How old was the aircraft in fact-ish?
I really don't know, Keith, but generally speaking, obviously the guys that were servicing them did everything within their power. But this was sort of second, third phase servicing when the hydraulic jack had been put together again, and it had been put together incorrectly, or they could never find the guy who did it because it's years earlier.
Just change their procedures, I suppose.
Yeah, so that's how it happened, and that's why I was literally spiralling down without any control. It was the hydraulic was so powerful to pull it through that there was no way I was ever going to get it back again. So
the main thing is you escaped very lightly, and
very lucky.
Is there many pilots that have banged out a couple of times, or 3 times, or 4 times?
I think there's a few.
Not that
done
common
2 or
though,
3.
I suppose. But
What used to happen then? I remember somebody said, they have a bang out thing in London, and it was when you'd go to one of the big fancy hotels in London,
another meal or something,
and then everybody that ejected that could get there, they'd walk around and see mates that ejected, and there were 2 or 3 that had 3, I think, and a couple that had 2, but generally speaking, it's usually just the one. The thing is that if you damage your back, it's not a good thing. For me to have, you can damage your back quite badly if you don't sit correctly, put your kidney pad in. You don't over tighten your shoulder straps because it changes that lovely curve in your back, which is what the kidney pad is for. So the main thing that I've always done is to tighten your lap straps and push your feet on the rudder pedals and get your bum right into the back of that cushion. So your posture when you actually go out is absolutely critical. Obviously that first ejection when I was screaming around the place didn't help, and I did damage my back on that fractionally, but there wasn't anything on the vertebrae that would stop me from flying.
All right, that's good then. Really,
again, because I was always strapping myself in reasonably well. But Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
There you go.
Lucky
That's-
me.
That's a good couple of stories, that, isn't it? Right. Should we change the pace of this a bit?
Okay.
So during the last episode or two, you give me a list of planes you flew,
Wow.
which is
Did
not
I?
all of them,
Oh.
but it's quite a mixture here. So let's go through this then. So we got a Tiger Moth Oster, Cherokee 180, Motor Flake,
Motorfolk, yeah.
Motorfolk, sorry, Jodell, Evans VP1,
Yeah, it's a funny little thing. Oh,
Chipmunk, Harvard, Wingill,
Windjill, yeah.
Great Lakes. That's the sea thing.
Oh, that was in America. Yeah.
yeah,
I was-
and if we go back to that one.
yeah,
right?
yeah, it was good.
Tailwood, of course, Cessna 206, Cessna Caravan, Beagle Bassett.
A Bassett.
Bassett? Is
Yeah.
that the Beagle, the twin engine thing?
Yeah, is that? No, I'm not qualified with that. Maybe I've written it down.
Oh, okay.
Bassett.
No, Bassett, yeah.
Oh.
What we got there? Pitts, PA-28, SF-260. That's a racing little aircraft, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
T-624. An Aerostar. What, a Ted Smith Aerostar?
Yeah, not a Nigerian. He was a Polish guy. Had an Aerostar, and he had MiGs, 3 MiGs, and to go and get up spares for the MiG-15, which he checked me out on. He had an Aerostar, and we used to fly around Australia trying to get some spares because a few people had bought MiG-15s, and we needed some because every single panel on a MiG-15 is almost different. We
Hand-built, I suppose.
flew around, and there was another guy with a
Oh,
MiG-15.
right. It's just
so-
quite an obscure plane, really.
Yeah.
Falco, Drifter, biplanes of various sorts. Bird Dog.
Yeah.
All the Spitfires, obviously, 25,
L4.
26. Dragonfly, Sapphire, RVs, Jabiroos, Zen Air, Stearman.
Now, a lot of this, in the Stearman, you didn't read P1 or P2, but all these aeroplanes I've sort of sat in and flown. The Stearman was a friend of mine, unfortunately he died recently, but and he put me in the front seat, and he basically checked me out. But
You
I
better
didn't
go
know-
in some of these.
yeah,
places.
a lot of them I've landed them and flown around for a bit, but they're not written down as first pilot. Oh, well, they're down as second pilot, but there's a list of...
So Yak, Rally,
Yeah.
AA5B Tiger. Blimey, the list goes on. The Jets then.
Oh,
Provost,
w-
Strike Master, Hunters,
yeah.
Lightnings, Jaguars, Hawks,
Yeah,
Machetes.
the Hunters and the Lightnings are different marks, but it doesn't
yeah,
really matter.
those of them
basically
there,
the
about
same.
5 or 6.
Don't we? Yeah.
Mirages, of course. Vampire as a second pilot.
That was good fun, yeah.
Starfire. That's quite a
What's that one?
Starfighter.
F-104.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, passenger, right?
Yeah, but
so
amazing.
you're
What
going
was
to
that like comparative to the Lightning? Was it a similar kind of thing?
well, we did a lot of
Strap
combat.
in, rocket,
we
and go.
did a lot of combat against the F-104s in the 70s. That was the standard aeroplane. The Italians had them, the Germans had them, and so on and so forth. The Dutch, and they couldn't turn as well as the Lightning. They were fast. I did some air to ground in a Canadian one, so I
Right.
flew with a German
Right.
who nearly killed me. Nearly flew into the sea.
That had loads, didn't they?
And he overstressed the tip tank.
Wow.
He pulled. I asked him. He's had a stick staker. We were doing a low-level sortie on our squadrons. We were giving them rides in Jaguars, and they were giving us rides in 104s. And I was sitting in the back seat, and we were going down a low-level route in the middle of England, and we were just chatting. And I said, "Oh, he's got a stick shaker on this, so when it get near the stall, it will shake." And I said, "Oh, we must have a look at that later on." He said, "I'll show you now." And without thinking, he pulled hard. He's a young pilot. And we had tip tanks on. And we'd been airborne about 10 minutes. And he said, "What's the height of the airway?" And I told him. And he said, "Oh, I can do a loop underneath that." I couldn't stop him. And he pulled hard like this over the top. And he said, "There's the stick shaker." And as we came down the other side, I looked out. And sure enough, his right-hand tip tank was shaking.
Oh, good
But
grief.
it didn't get back again. It was actually bent. It overstressed it.
Wow.
It got fuel in it.
Blimey.
So we had to go back to base. But the 104's good.
Yeah, so F4.
Back seat again.
Yeah,
But
interesting.
that was fun.
MiG-15 then, what was that
Oh
like?
yeah,
Was that a really...
that was that Polish guy who bought 3 or 4 of them.
But to fly in a
And
MiG must have been interesting for you. And
it was
the layout and everything of the cockpit. And
Oh, it's normal, basically, but
good
it's all in
aircraft, though,
Russian.
isn't it,
It's all
really?
in Russian.
But it's a good basic aircraft, isn't it?
It's actually surprisingly quick, and once you're airborne and you've got it all up, and there's some usual things about it. It's got air brake for taxiing, and if you use it too much, you run out of brakes. So it requires to have pressurized brakes all the time. The engine itself is quite remarkable because it's based on the Vampire.
Yeah, it's the one that we gave to the Russians, wasn't it?
But its actual shape was really good. So you can flash around at 300, 350 knots. The real problem was the landing, because it's aerodynamic. It had these fences on the wing which smooths the air up, to get to your ailerons. And anything below about 129, I seem to remember, or 125, the thing is sort of falling out of the sky. So it's a difficult aeroplane to land smoothly. The whole purpose of the aeroplane then was to give people rides in it. There were two-seaters. And I spent about 6 months strapping people in and briefing them and so on and so forth. And then eventually they checked me out in it, and we went to a place called Wollongong on the coast of New South Wales. And I did my checkout there by a young man. And eventually I went into the front seat to get my checkout so I could carry passengers at this particular place. And as I landed and taxied in off my first solo, there were dozens and dozens of women with these signs. We don't want jets at Wollongong. Too much noise. And we were literally browbeaten as we got down at the cockpit. So we couldn't actually carry out flying there.
All right. Okay.
And we had to go back to inland.
So obviously...
But that was fun.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Another extremity is a Nimrod, of course. So that's...
again, I mean, I wasn't captain or anything, but I was at Boscombe Down on my last posting, 6 months at Boscombe Down, and I was in handling squadron, sort of a punishment posting really. Or in fact, I didn't have enough time in the Air Force. I was already leave the Air Force after 20 years service. So, but Boscombe Down was fabulous because I knew a couple of the test pilots there that were flying the heavies, and they had to fly the single-seaters, the Jaguar, the Lightning, the Hunter, to keep their hand in, and they didn't have, like I did, 800 or 1,000 hours on type. So they'd phone me up and say, Rick, do you want to come with me in the Lightning or the Hunter or the Jaguar? And I'd say, you bet. So I'm out of the office.
Yeah.
The wing commander was a bit pissed off because I was never there. And I was flying the Hawk.
On a jolly, yeah.
Got checked out on the Hawk as well. So I was very lucky. I was having some good fun.
And obviously the Meteor as well.
The Nimrod, I must tell you this. We went to my best friend was on B Squadron, and he said, Rick, I need a co-pilot of a Nimrod. And I said, Jesus. He said, just sit there and we'll go out over the North Straits and drop some sonar buoys.
Yeah.
All the crew in the back. And I'll tell you, one of the most amazing things is sitting in this fantastic Comet, if you like, Nimrod, was banking at low level with these massive wings. And we're probably about 150, 200 feet. But it felt as when you went into a bank, 45 degrees bank, over these waves over the North Sea, that... or in fact it was the Atlantic anyway, the tip tank was going to hit the ground or the wing, and then they were dropping, so it was really wonderful to fly. I enjoyed that. So
I think the ballooning, I think we'll come back to that in the future and do an episode on ballooning.
On ballooning, yes, why not?
Because we've covered quite a lot here now, so I've got a few on my little list here which I think might interest you. Seaplanes and float planes, flying boats, that's a fascination for me.
Wow.
Have you had any inkling of...
Yes.
Because again, that comes in with a little question. Who do you think's the most skillful pilots? To me, in my mind, looking from the outside, if you're flying off the water, you're a boat captain, you're a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
You're flying in remote places, difficult weather. So is there a kind of pilot you think those guys... Well, I suppose the water bomber guys, isn't it? Who dropped the fire retardant stuff.
I'm just trying to think. I applied for a flying job.
Were you interested in that at all, that area?
Yeah, I wanted to do it when I was
Mike
up in Queensland, but I never... I wanted to get checked out on a float plane.
Yeah.
It was a single-engined, big radial engine with floats on it, and they were sort of thing. But I didn't get the job because I would have to be qualified, and that takes some time.
Yeah.
But never been in one. I had a trip in what was it called? what's that big one with the twin engines on top that picked up people in the war?
Catalina.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful things.
And that was just basically bumming around.
Some
in the back.
companies revamping those and putting turboprops and actually building them again. I think they're building them again.
Yeah. The first one I saw was under the water in Darwin. I was flying Lightnings in Darwin in a visit, and we flew over the shallows, and there was a sunken one that had been there since the war, and it was still in bits and pieces.
So, what do you think? Who are the most skillful pilots? Do you think, apart from yourself? Have you ever looked back and thought these guys really are good? Throughout all your career, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, I've met
squadron somewhere.
I got what was the first guy that went supersonic? Chuck Yeager.
Yeah.
I met Chuck Yeager, and he signed my logbook.
Well, that's nice.
He'd come to visit us in Australia to try and sell an aeroplane to them in the mid-1980s.
Yeah.
Before they bought the F-18, and he was working for the company and made the F5. It was called the F5. What's it called? I'll think of it in a minute. They'll know. My listeners will know. I'll think of it in a second. And it was a little fighter, straightish wing and two-seat trainer as well. But it would have been good for air-to-ground, air defence. And he spent an hour talking to us, trying to flog this thing, maybe half an hour, and then we went to the mess and we all chatted to him. He's got quite a career, I suppose. If you're talking about good pilots, what else was there I've met? Some of the most military pilots. I've met civilian pilots. Did I tell you about the guy that got crippled from the waist down? Did I tell you?
No.
Yeah, as civilian pilots who were quite incredible. And there was a Swedish guy who taught me to fly the tailwind, little guy, and his name was Bert Persson. And I've flown with a lot of civilians in Australia, and their skills were quite remarkable. Aerobatics, I flew with Gary Cooper. I've just got his book again, and he was a Mirage pilot, a Sabre pilot. I knew him, and he's got his own look-alike Japanese Zero.
All right.
And I've known Gary now for maybe 30, 40 years, and I'm just reading his book again, Sock It To Me, Baby. And he was a bird dog pilot in Vietnam. He'd dead stick 2 Mirages.
All right. So
The Americans put him up for the Medal of Honor. And
so very talented then.
he was very talented pilot. But no, I can't think of singling anybody out. But
but you met quite a few.
Yeah, I've
really
met some amazing pilots who've gone from, as I say, Mirages to 747s to and I've met.
So what about helicopters then? Did that ever float your boat or?
Yeah, they saved my life twice because the one in Oman. Certainly,
but do you ever
if it
fancy
hadn't have been there? I've flown in Hong Kong to the top of a hill in a tiny little one with they were basically what were they called, tank people, an army, and they had this tiny little bell-like looking thing that landed on top of a hill in Hong Kong.
Well, what about actually flying one? Have you had a go?
I've had a go. I managed when I was at Yeovilton flying the Hunters. I went across and flew the Gazelle. All right. But I didn't manage to hover it perfectly. No. I was sort of still wobbling around. But I managed to do straight in and land. But just, it was obviously in the controls. I had to go in a Sea King. And I've had to go in a Whirlwind in Borneo in 1964, 65. I went out in a Whirlwind into the jungle in Borneo with a guy for a jolly. Well, he was dropping stuff off, and I was in the left hand. Would I be in the left or right hand seat? Anyway, the dicky seat, and we tried to hover it. He gave me control in the middle of this clearing with 200-foot high trees all alongside. They were probably about 100 yards away, and I couldn't hover it. It was too
right. Okay, we go for one of my fantasy questions now. This is a good one. I've got to bang these out because they're quite
I've
intriguing.
had to try most things. But
right. So what aircraft would you like to fly that are current now? What do you see flying over you think?
Yeah, I'd love to fly an F-22. I mean, and it's just it's just the epitome of the final, the way they have
evolved, I suppose. Yeah.
Exhausts that do this and the turning. Yeah, I'd love to get my butt in an F-22 just to see the very epitome of
see where it's all
fighters.
gone to since you.
Yeah, and I regret not being 20 years younger and getting on, if I could still meet the quality, was get the Eurofighter. I mean, a fabulous looking thing. I was asked when I was at FRADU to go to Wharton for the day because they wanted to get experienced fighter pilots into this new machine that was coming on. So we're now looking in the 1980s. And it was all very hush-hush. And I went to the same buildings that I saw as a 10-year-old in that first program I mentioned when I was 10. And the same sheds, but more modern, all very secret. Walked through a door, and on my right, behind some big Hessian screens, was the mock-up of the future Eurofighter. It had twin fins on it, this particular mock-up did, I noticed, like the F-15 and so on. And then I got to this mock-up cockpit, and the various boffins came up, and they put you in this cockpit, and how it reflects the modern Eurofighter cockpit was probably very similar. It had a head-up display. There was no moving screen or anything like that, but it was a cockpit. A woman was speaking to me, and I had to basically just sit in it for an hour, and they flashed various things up, and the woman would say, you have a hydraulic failure, and a lot of it was automatic. And I just remember spending the day there with this guy who was my flight commander on Jaguars, and he'd become a test pilot, and he was one of the pilots that first flew the Eurofighter, and he got various experienced pilots in to give them an idea of what they thought of the layout and the instruments and where they were, and how the interrelationship with this speaking voice, and she'd say, you have a hydraulic one failure, you have a hydraulic one failure, and then you had to do certain things, and she would direct you. So I remember going there and doing that and talking to the test pilots, and that was the start of the initial Eurofighter program.
Great.
Which is a way of doing things. What was the question?
Well, basically, what aircraft you see around
okay. So the latest gear that people have got, and I remember going to a 6-squadron reunion at Coningsby, and the Eurofighter, it was 2004, and the Eurofighter had been in for 4 years, and a young squadron leader stood up and talked to all these ex-Hunter, Lightning, Phantom guys in the audience on 6th Squadron, and we just asked the questions, and he said, this aeroplane you can turn upside down at 5,000 feet and it will right itself. It knows when it's wrong.
Yeah.
It knows it does all this, and we just went,
amazing, isn't it?
It is, and it's the same with the radars. When you compare a radar in a modern fighter now with the Lightning, you're working like a one-arm paper in a Lightning, and you're having to manage things, and your hands are all over the place. I mean, a modern fighter now, to get into it.
Well, I suppose like any modern aircraft, even an airline, you're an analyst of data, aren't you? It does everything, but you just monitor everything and hopefully have the skill set to take over if things go pear-shaped. But
yeah, I mean, to me, having a GPS in an aeroplane. I remember when we went to Gulf War II in the Hunter with FRADU, and the 5 of us went. That picture on the wall there, Canberra and 4 Hunters. They put in GPS. We had this little box up in the top, and we had it for about a month before the Gulf War II. And we couldn't believe this, because most of the time we were intercepting ships 100 miles off the coast in Scotland, and trying to find them was just a nightmare, because over the sea, you can't navigate it. You just know where the fleet was. But if you were given a lat and long and you could put it in this little black box, you couldn't believe it. And the thing that was really amazing was you'd get 2 airplanes coming back from attacking the ships and 2 more going out. And we'd say, we'd put in this lighthouse or a headland off the top of the Hebrides somewhere. And we'd go towards it following this little thing on this thing called a GPS. And goodness me, they were doing the same thing coming the other way, and we nearly hit one another. And that to us was just mind-blowingly frightening. And that's the point, that everybody is going to the same point. And you suddenly thought, well, that wouldn't happen in the old days. You'd be looking out and
Yeah.
keeping your eye open for your mate. But over the desert, over the sea, flying Jaguars over the desert in Oman, knowing that you could put a target in and 4 of you could go to war, and the leader can lose his GPS, and the guy in second in charge, the number 3, can still go to war, and we all join him. So in the early days of hunter flying over the jungles and things, if you weren't good enough to lead a 4-ship and your maps were dropped, or you couldn't go, or you got shot down, you had to hand it to somebody that wasn't capable. But when you've got the equipment, everybody can get to the target.
Yeah.
Everybody can hit it.
More efficient.
Everybody can see the enemy on the radar, because it's all done by computers.
Yeah.
So it makes everything more efficient, that's for certain. Anyway, F-22 will do.
Okay then. Right, I think we conclude that for now.
Why not?
But I think in the future we'll do one on ballooning, because that's totally different. and
Yes,
we've got some good tales to tell there.
Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for these chapters and
dear,
episodes, and hopefully people
Sorry, it went on a bit.
No, I think people will find it interesting. I certainly have. I mean, you told me the stories before, but you've gone into more detail, and there's where do you stop, basically?
Yeah, but,
Well, okay. Well, thanks very much,
Rick.
Keith, and see you soon.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you
Cheers.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.